Munich, June 18th, 2020, 7:47 in the morning. An auditor sits at a conference table. In front of him, a single refusal letter, 13 years of clean audits, and 1.9 billion euros that does not exist. And the craziest part? The money was never there. Not stolen, not moved, never deposited at all. And the men paid to verify it had signed off. Every single year. For 13 straight years. Jan Marsalek was the chief operating officer who signed those books. And while the world trusted his numbers, he was flying into Syria, firing rockets alongside Russian mercenaries. But this isn't just a story about a fake number. It's about the verification trick that fooled one of the biggest accounting firms on Earth. The journalist Wirecard spent years trying to destroy, and the executive who walked calmly onto a plane and vanished into Moscow. One phone call could have ended all of it. 11 minutes. For 13 years, nobody made it. This is how Germany's most celebrated company faked a fortune that never existed, and how its COO disappeared into thin air. To understand the scandal, you first have to understand how big Wirecard became. By the late 2000s and 10s, Wirecard was the pride of Germany. People called it the PayPal of Europe, a fintech darling, a company that processed payments and moved money across the world, growing faster than anyone thought possible. And the growth looked spectacular. Its revenue climbed year after year. 1.1 billion euros, then 1.7 billion, then 2.8 billion. Every number audited, every number signed clean by one of the most respected accounting firms in the world. At the center of it sat two men, the chief executive, Markus Braun, an Austrian who owned a huge slice of the company and spoke about the future of money like a prophet, and the chief operating officer, Jan Marsalek. Marsalek ran operations. He charmed investors. He signed the financial statements. He was the man who always seemed to have an answer for exactly where the money was. But Marsalek had a second life, and it was not a small one. In May 2017, Wirecard reported 1.7 billion euros in audited revenue. That same month, the COO who signed those statements was on another continent entirely. Not in a boardroom, not in Munich, in Palmyra, Syria. There, dressed as a soldier, Jan Marsalek fired a rocket launcher at ISIS positions, standing alongside commanders from the Wagner Group, the Russian private military whose units would later publish footage of executing unarmed prisoners. Travel data would confirm all of it years later. At the time, no one in Munich had any idea. The man signing Germany's most celebrated balance sheet was moonlighting in a war zone with Russian mercenaries. So how does a man like that fool an entire country for 13 years? Part of the answer is that the entire German establishment had decided to believe him. By September 2018, Wirecard had done something extraordinary. It pushed aside Commerzbank, a bank more than a century old, and took its place in the DAX 30, the index of Germany's 30 most prestigious corporations. It now stood beside Volkswagen, Siemens, and Deutsche Bank. And everyone lined up behind it. The German chancellor personally raised Wirecard during a trip to Beijing. The Japanese giant SoftBank poured in 900 million euros. Goldman Sachs told its clients to buy. The stock soared to 191 euros. Ordinary people followed the smart money. Retirees bought Wirecard shares. Pension funds invested. Insurance companies allocated billions. The DAX was supposed to be safe. Wirecard was supposed to be one of them. And that is what makes this story so unsettling. This was not some shady operation hiding in the shadows. It was a celebrated public company, audited without interruption for 13 years, blessed by bankers, politicians, and regulators alike. The more respectable it looked on the outside, the safer everyone felt putting their money inside. Why would anyone doubt a company the whole country had blessed? That, it turned out, was exactly the problem. 3,000 miles from Frankfurt's trading floor, one man read the DAX announcement and did not celebrate. Dan McCrum, still under criminal investigation himself, opened a blank document and typed a single line at the top. What they haven't checked. Because the deeper question was one almost nobody asked. Where, exactly, was all the money? Here is the strange truth at the heart of it. You don't move money you don't have. You invent it. and then you build a system so that no one can ever check whether it's real. Wirecard told its auditors that a large part of its cash wasn't held in Germany at all. It was held by 3 third-party partners, companies in Dubai, Singapore, and Manila. Each one supposedly held Wirecard's profits in trust, parked in Philippine bank accounts, until Wirecard asked for it back. There was just one small detail. All 3 of those partners were controlled by Wirecard itself. Every year, the auditors from EY asked the obvious question: where is the cash? Every year, Wirecard answered, the Philippines. So EY sent out a confirmation request, but not to the Philippine bank. They sent it to Wirecard's own affiliated auditors in Singapore. And those auditors confirmed, yes, the accounts exist. Yes, the funds are there. For 13 years, EY never once contacted the Philippine bank directly. And for 13 years, that bank held nothing. Stop and let that sink in. The auditors were checking the cash by asking the very people who claimed to be holding it. It was like verifying a man's bank balance by asking the man himself, and then writing down whatever he said as fact. Do you see the genius of it? The fraud was not hidden in the numbers. It was hidden in the way the numbers were checked. The lie lived inside the verification itself, and it would hold perfectly, as long as nobody asked the right person the right question. There was a strange gravity to it, too. The bigger Wirecard grew, the more credible it looked. The more times EY signed off, the more EY stood to lose by ever admitting it had been wrong. By 2018, the machine protected itself, and Wirecard was utterly confident in public. The relationships, a company representative insisted, were all authentic, all checked. We can say 100% that we checked these allegations. Every denial sounded calm. Every denial sounded credible. That was the whole point. Because the hardest thing in the world isn't spotting a fraud, it's admitting you fell for one. So everything, billions of euros, an entire blue-chip company, the savings of thousands of ordinary Germans, rested on a single phone call that nobody was willing to make. But somewhere out there, a few people had quietly started asking. It began with one paragraph. London, 2015. Inside the Financial Times building in Southwark, a journalist named Dan McCrum wrote a short blog post. Just one paragraph, quietly questioning Wirecard's accounting. Nothing dramatic, a simple question. How did Wirecard respond? Not with a phone call, with a legal threat. One of Germany's most expensive law firms, 50 lawyers, against one reporter. That was only the beginning, and it would not be the last time Wirecard tried to destroy a person for asking a simple question. When McCrum published his first full investigation, Wirecard hired private intelligence operatives. They photographed him on the streets of London. They built dossiers on his sources. Then German prosecutors opened a criminal investigation. Not into Wirecard, into McCrum himself, for market manipulation. Think about that. The journalist questioning the fraud became the man under criminal investigation. You suddenly find yourself facing a real criminal investigation in Germany. McCrum later said, there were moments when that was quite stressful. His sources stopped calling. His editors started asking how much longer this would take. McCrum didn't have an answer, but he had the numbers, so he kept writing. Meanwhile, a second person had seen something. Singapore, 2017. A young lawyer named Pav Gill joined Wirecard as head of legal for the Asia-Pacific region. A respected German company, a good salary. Within weeks, something felt wrong. Backdated contracts, revenue that didn't match the bank statements. He reported it. They told him to stop. He didn't. In August 2018, his manager insisted he fly to Jakarta for a presentation. That same week, an anonymous message arrived from Wirecard's own Munich headquarters. We strongly recommend you don't go, it said, because you will not come back. He didn't go to Jakarta. Within weeks, he was pushed out of the company, followed, his apartment photographed, missed calls from numbers that led nowhere. But here is where the story turns in a way no one expected. Gill was not the only one being watched. His mother, 61 years old, noticed the same car parked outside her flat for the third day in a row. She did not call her son. She understood that if she did, they might both disappear. So she did something quiet and extraordinary. She took the documents her son had stored at her house, the contracts, the bank statements. She walked to a public computer. She created an anonymous email account, and she contacted the Financial Times, signing with a fake name. 4 months later, the FT published its investigation, and the documents that Mother had carried became the backbone of every single claim. But protecting the truth cost Pav Gill almost everything. He later told Reuters he had been warned this would be career-ending if he pursued it. "I remain an unprotected person," he said, and he was. While he waited in a Bangkok apartment, ceiling fan turning slowly in the heat, there was no government protection, no legal status, and not a single charge filed against one Wirecard executive. What kind of company makes a 61-year-old woman smuggle evidence to a newspaper just to protect her own son? The kind that had something enormous to hide. By now, Wirecard had a choice: come clean or fight. It chose to fight, and it had powerful friends. Every formal warning about Wirecard landed on the desk of the head of Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, the agency whose entire purpose is to protect investors. The first complaint arrived in 2017. He read it, he put it in a folder, and the revenue kept climbing. Each number signed by the same firm, each number false. Then, in January 2019, the Financial Times published its most damning report yet. Forged contracts, backdated transactions, revenue that could not be traced to any real customer or any real bank. The market reacted instantly. Wirecard's stock crashed 37% in a single day. 7.4 billion euros of value, gone in hours. This was the moment. This was when Germany's regulator could finally act. So what did it do? On February 19, 2019, the head of BaFin signed an extraordinary order. He banned short selling on Wirecard shares, a weapon so powerful it hadn't been used since the 2008 financial crisis. But he did not point it at the company under suspicion. He pointed it at the people investigating it. And that same week, BaFin opened a criminal inquiry, not into Wirecard, into Dan McCrum. Read that again. The regulator built to protect investors was now protecting the fraud. This was not a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, 3 separate times. BaFin was handed the truth, 3 separate times. It aimed at the messenger. In 2016, a short seller published a 101-page report laying out fraud, money laundering, fake accounts, and shell companies. BaFin investigated the short seller. In January 2019, the FT published evidence of criminal forgeries. BaFin investigated the journalist. In October 2019, police in Singapore raided Wirecard's Asian offices. BaFin did nothing at all. Picture that October raid for a moment. Officers walked through Wirecard's Asian headquarters. Documents were seized. Staff were interviewed. Law enforcement was physically inside the machine. BaFin received formal notification of all of it. It did not coordinate. It did not request the findings. It did not open a parallel investigation. Wirecard walked away from a police raid without a single regulatory consequence in Germany. 3 moments, 3 documented choices. Every single time, it chose the company over the evidence. And here is the terrible logic underneath it. The more BaFin protected Wirecard, the larger the fraud had to grow. By 2020, the phantom 1.9 billion euros had been sitting on the books for 5 straight years. A fraud like that cannot shrink. It can only grow. And it could only keep growing as long as no one called the Philippine bank. Through all of it, McCrum kept writing. Not every week, not every month, just often enough. Each claim independently verifiable, each source protected. He wasn't chasing momentum. He was building a case the way an engineer builds a bridge, from mathematical certainty. And the cracks were spreading. One of Wirecard's mysterious partners had no other clients at all. Another's entire office was a single rented room above a shop. A third could not produce one single verified customer contract. McCrum could see the fracture, running from Manila to Singapore to Dubai. BaFin still wasn't looking. Then came the closest call yet. In early 2020, Wirecard agreed to a special independent audit. And for the first time in 13 years, it wasn't EY. It was a second firm, KPMG. For the first time, fresh eyes were on the numbers. For 4 months, the entire fraud was one phone call away from collapse. KPMG asked for proof of the Philippine trust accounts. Wirecard handed over a bank letter. It looked official. It listed account numbers. It listed balances. But KPMG could not verify it. What if KPMG had simply called the bank? It didn't. In April 2020, its conclusion was carefully worded. Not, "This is fraud." Not, "These accounts don't exist." Just 3 quiet words. "We cannot verify." Wirecard called the result inconclusive. The stock recovered. McCrum was still under criminal investigation. The fraud had survived one more time. But it was running out of room. While all of this played out, Dan McCrum sat in London with Wirecard's 2019 annual report in front of him, signed, once again, by EY. He turned to the trust account page. He circled one number, 1.9 billion euros. He had been circling that same number for 5 years. What he didn't know, what no one outside EY knew yet, was that someone inside EY had finally decided to make the call. In April 2020, working through KPMG's findings, an EY auditor picked up the phone, and for the first time in 13 years, they dialed the Philippine bank directly, not through Singapore affiliates, not through Wirecard's partners, the actual bank. The call lasted 11 minutes. The bank checked its records. The account numbers Wirecard had provided, not recognized. The trust accounts supposedly holding nearly 2 billion euros. No record they had ever been opened. The money? Never deposited, never transferred out. It had simply never existed. 11 minutes, 13 years. That was the entire distance between the truth and the lie. On June 18, 2020, EY refused to sign. No audit opinion, no sign-off. After 13 consecutive clean audits, suddenly, silence. Wirecard's stock fell 70% in a single day. 700 kilometers to the south, in a Vienna penthouse, Jan Marsalek read the news on his phone. He read it twice. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a number. The country code was +7, Russia. The company scrambled. It put out a statement claiming the 1.9 billion might have been, in its words, deceivingly excluded, and that it was working to clarify. The clarification never came. 3 days later, the chief executive, Marcus Braun, resigned. And inside the company, the COO knew exactly what was coming. On June 22nd, Braun fired Jan Marsalek by email. It was formal, on the record. Marsalek read the email. He closed his laptop, and then he did something that, in hindsight, looks almost rehearsed. He drove to Vienna International Airport, alone. He used his real Austrian passport, his own name, his own face, captured on the airport cameras, and he boarded a private flight to Minsk. In Minsk, a contact was waiting. They drove east to Moscow. He stepped into the arrivals terminal, and he simply kept walking, straight into a country that would never give him back. 3 days after that, on June 25th, 2020, Wirecard filed for insolvency. The first company in the history of the DAX ever to do so. 13.5 billion euros, gone. And Jan Marsalek? Alive, untouched, about to be handed an entirely new name. No one was coming for him. In the rubble, the question became simple. Who paid the price? In Munich, in 2024, Marcus Braun sat at the defense table. His position never changed. "I was the victim of a deception," he said. He repeated that exact line 41 times over 3 days of testimony. The trial would grind on. The auditors faced consequences too, of a kind. EY's German arm was fined 500,000 euros and banned from taking on new public interest mandates for 2 years. 4 auditors surrendered their licenses, but not a single individual faced criminal charges. EY's defense was that it had been lied to. "We were given falsified documents," one representative said. "Falsified bank statements. A very well-orchestrated fraud. I regret we didn't find it earlier." But a fine is just a number on a page. The real cost landed somewhere far quieter. In Munich, there was an accounting specialist. a man who had spent years studying Wirecard's balance sheets. He believed he understood the company better than almost anyone. He read every annual report. He trusted the auditor. He trusted the DAX. And he put 300,000 euros of his own retirement into the stock. He did everything a careful investor is supposed to do. And he lost all of it the day EY refused to sign. 300,000 euros, built over a lifetime, erased because the one institution he trusted to check the money had never actually checked it. When the stock finally stopped falling, he said he felt something he didn't expect. Not anger, relief. It's just over now. How many others were there, quietly, across Germany? Retirees, pension funds, insurers, all of whom had simply trusted the system to do what it promised. And what about the regulator that had protected the fraud at every turn? The head of BaFin resigned in January 2021. His successor announced reforms. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Almost nothing changed. To this day, German regulators still cannot force auditors to verify overseas cash accounts directly. The exact flaw that let Wirecard fake nearly 2 billion euros for more than a decade is still there. And that very first complaint, the one filed back in 2017, it is reportedly still sitting in that folder, never opened by an investigator. So the people who asked the questions were investigated. The people who ignored the questions kept their pensions, and the man at the center of it all was already gone. But the real shock was still coming, because Jan Marsalek had never really been a businessman at all. Today, in Moscow, a man passes through the Lubyanka metro station every morning. Black suit, black tie, black glasses. A MacBook tucked under his arm. Several plastic surgeries have given him a new face, and he has a new name, Konstantin Byazov. He is not in hiding. He is going to work. That man is Jan Marsalek, and a joint investigation by The Insider, Der Spiegel, German public television, and PBS Frontline revealed what he truly was. Marsalek was not a fraudster who simply fled to Russia when things fell apart. He had been a Russian military intelligence asset, recruited, investigators believe, around 2010. Sit with that timeline for a second. The entire time he was building Wirecard into Germany's 24 billion euro champion, he was also working for the GRU. The same years he was signing those audited statements, smiling for investors, and charming the German establishment, he was flying into Palmyra with Wagner commanders. The details that emerged were staggering. He allegedly arranged for his girlfriend to carry a stolen NATO-encrypted laptop through Istanbul toward Russian intelligence. One intercepted message in December 2022 described the device sitting in a car, on its way to Ljubljana. He helped organize surveillance on journalists he wanted dead. An Austrian intelligence officer working with him reportedly bought a reporter's home address from a government registry office. The price? €3.40. And in 2023, he was said to have traveled to occupied Mariupol as part of a Russian military unit. Suddenly, the rocket launcher in Palmyra made a different kind of sense. The COO, who faked a fortune, was never really chasing the money. He was running an operation. So step back and look at the whole thing. Wirecard existed for 20 years. It had employees, offices, a board of directors, auditors, a regulator. It had the German chancellor lobbying for it in Beijing. It had pension funds, insurance companies, and ordinary retirees betting their futures on it. And the money was never there. The COO was never a businessman. The entire structure may have been something other than a company from the very start. A handful of people saw it, a journalist who kept writing through years of surveillance and criminal investigation, a young lawyer who refused to stay quiet, a mother who walked to a public computer to protect her son. They were doubted, followed, and investigated, while the men who looked away kept their reputations intact. And in the end, what finally destroyed the fraud wasn't an army of regulators or a task force of detectives. It was one direct phone call, 11 minutes long, the exact call that could have been made at any point across 13 years. Think about everything that one missing phone call cost. Billions of euros, an entire blue-chip company, the retirement of a careful man in Munich who did nothing wrong. All of it balanced on a question nobody in power was willing to ask out loud. Marsalek is still out there. New face, new name, still, by every account, going to work each morning. And the question that no one in Frankfurt, Berlin, Brussels, or London has truly answered still hangs in the air. Was Wirecard ever really a company? Or was it always an operation? And if it was, who approved it? And that brings us to the end of our story. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and activate the bell button so you can receive new videos.